The sound comes before anything else. Not wind, not hooves on packed dirt. Something worse, the wet, hollow crack of wood against flesh, repeated. 3 times. 4. Then silence thick enough to press against the chest. And then a horse screams. Not the way horses whinny or blow breath through their nostrils in greeting. A scream, high and ragged and terribly human. The kind of sound that splits open the air and doesn't close back up. Nora Caswell heard it from 40 feet away, past the sweat-soaked crowd and the carnival noise of the vaquejada, past the smell of fried dough and diesel and manure baking in the August heat. She heard it the way you hear something you've been waiting your whole life not to hear, with the whole body, not just the ears. She stopped walking. The man holding the board didn't. Before we follow Nora into what happens next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed quiet when you knew you shouldn't? When you saw something wrong happening right in front of you, and you told yourself it wasn't your business, that stepping in would cost you too much? Most of us have. Most of us live with it. Nora Caswell lived with it for 23 years. And on the day she finally stopped, on the day she finally said enough, the truth that came loose nearly buried her. Nearly. If this kind of story reaches something in you, hit like before we go any further. Subscribe if you haven't. And drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to that sound. The town of Crestfall, Texas does not appear on most maps. That is not an accident. It sits 40 miles east of nowhere useful, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings arranged around a grain elevator and a water tower painted with a longhorn that has been flaking since 1987. The main street has a diner, a feed store, a bank that smells like mildew, and a real estate office with the same listings in the window for the last 6 years. Most of the listings belong to people who left. Most of the land belongs to 3 families who never will. The Howell family controls the largest spread, 12,000 acres of cattle pasture and pecan groves stretching north to the county line. The Dunbar family holds the river bottomland and the water rights that go with it. And Clem Sauer, who is not a family but acts like one, owns the feed mill, the auction house, and the unofficial loyalty of every man in Crestfall who depends on either. This is the world Nora Caswell has refused to leave for 58 years. Her property sits on the western edge of town, 14 acres of what used to be a working cattle operation, now mostly gone to scrubweed and memory. A farmhouse with a porch that leans slightly south, a barn that smells of cedar and calendula oil, a vegetable garden in raised beds built by her husband Randall the summer before he died, which she has tended obsessively ever since because letting it go would mean something she is not prepared to name. She sells herbal remedies from a card table at the Saturday market, tinctures for joint pain, salves for cracked hands, teas that help with sleep. The women of Crestfall buy them quietly, the way women buy things they don't want their husbands to know about. The men pretend they don't exist. That suits Nora fine. She has 4 goats, 2 dogs of uncertain breed, 11 chickens, and a one-eyed mule named Theodore, who came to her 3 winters ago after his previous owner decided he was no longer worth feeding. Theodore is disagreeable, occasionally mean, and the most reliable thing in her life. She would not trade him for anything. People in Crestfall have opinions about Nora Caswell. They have always had opinions. She is too stubborn, too quiet, too strange, with her jars of dried herbs and her habit of walking the fence line at dawn and her refusal to sell the property to Clem Sauer, who has made the offer 4 times in 8 years and each time received a polite written note explaining that the land is not for sale and will not be. What people in Crestfall do not say, because saying it would require acknowledging a history most of them would prefer to leave buried. Nora Caswell has reasons to be the way she is. 23 years ago, her mother, a woman named Della, small and quick-eyed and fierce about exactly 3 things in the world, was killed on Farm Road 12 when a livestock truck belonging to the Howell operation ran her off the road in the pre-dawn dark. The driver was never charged. The truck had no company markings that morning. 3 witnesses who initially came forward found reasons, within a week, to revise their accounts. The sheriff at the time was a man named Purvis Gann, who owned 40 acres adjacent to Howell land and had a son who worked in their payroll office. Della Caswell had, the week before she died, filed a written complaint with the county about illegal water diversion affecting her daughter's property. The complaint was logged, stamped, and misfiled. When Nora tried to retrieve it after the funeral, she was told it could not be located. She was 35 years old. She had just buried her mother and her husband's health was already beginning to decline, and she had no money for a lawyer and no allies in a town where the men who mattered all ate lunch at the same table every Thursday. So she stayed quiet. She stayed quiet for 23 years. She learned the names of plants that heal bruises and break fevers. She took in animals that people threw away. She kept the property her parents had worked their whole lives to pay off. And she carried the silence the way you carry something heavy, not dramatically, not visibly, but constantly, in the body, in the posture, in the way you hold yourself when the men who own this town walk past you and don't bother to look. The morning of the Crestfall summer vaquejada, Nora had not planned to go. She went because her neighbor's boy, a 13-year-old named Weston's kid, she never remembers his name, only his gap-toothed grin, knocked on her door at 7 in the morning and told her she had to come see the horses. She went because she couldn't say no to a gap-toothed grin. She almost didn't get out of the truck when she arrived and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes that belonged to people who had decided, long ago, what she was worth. She got out anyway. That is the thing about Nora Caswell that no one in Crestfall has ever quite managed to account for. She always gets out of the truck. The vaquejada had been running since dawn. By mid-morning, the grounds behind the Crestfall Fairgrounds smelled of churned earth and horse sweat, and the particular brand of masculine celebration that involves too much sun and not enough water. Men in starched shirts and good boots leaned against fence rails. Women in lawn chairs held cups of iced tea and watched the arena with the patient, slightly removed expressions of people who have seen this many times. Nora moved through the crowd the way she always moved through Crestfall, efficiently and without making eye contact. She found a spot at the far end of the rail fence, near the livestock pens, where the crowd thinned and the smell was worse, but the pressure of being observed was slightly less. The animals were in holding pens along the eastern fence. Horses mostly, some mules, a few donkeys with the stunned look of creatures who had been somewhere else this morning and hadn't entirely caught up with the current situation. She saw the white mare immediately, not because the horse was doing anything dramatic, because she wasn't, because in a pen full of animals that shuffled and stamped and swished tails against flies, the white mare stood perfectly still with her head dropped low and her sides heaving in a slow, labored rhythm that Nora recognized before she could name it. The mare was very pregnant. Nora could see the swell of the belly from 20 feet away, heavy and low, the foal clearly near to dropping. The animal's hip bones jutted through skin that had grown loose from inadequate feeding. There was dried blood along one flank from what looked like an old rope burn, healed badly. One of her rear legs was wrapped in a bandage that had come partially undone and trailed in the dirt. Her coat was white, or had been, once. Now it was gray with dust and sweat and the particular dullness that comes from an animal that has stopped trying to be anything but a body enduring. She had extraordinary eyes, though, dark and very large, and, in the moment Nora found them across the distance of the pen, absolutely alert. Not dull, not broken. Alert in the way of something that is watching and waiting and has not yet decided what to do with what it sees. Nora stood at that fence for a long moment. Then she heard the man's voice, and everything sharpened. Get up, get up. You useless, get up. The man's name was Court Dunbar. He was 54 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had hardened in the Texas sun into something resembling red sandstone. He came from the Dunbar family, and he carried that fact in front of him the way other men carry their wallets, as proof that he could do what he wanted and be owed something afterward. He had hitched the white mare to a flatbed cart loaded with hay bales, roughly 800 pounds of feed for a horse that should not have been hitched to anything at all. The mare had managed 3 steps and then stopped. Her legs were trembling. Her head had dropped almost to the ground. Court Dunbar was holding a length of split fence board, roughly 3 feet long, and he was using it. Nora counted the blows without meaning to. That was something she did. Counted, cataloged, stayed inside the numbers because the numbers were survivable and the thing they were measuring was not. 1, 2, 3. The crowd nearby had gone quiet in that specific way crowds go quiet when something is happening that everyone sees and no one has yet decided to respond to. 4. The mare didn't move. She absorbed each blow with a shudder that traveled the length of her body and then went still again. Not defiant. Exhausted beyond the capacity for defiance. She had simply run out of something that would allow her to move, and no amount of force was going to restore it. 5. Nora was already moving before she was conscious of having decided to move. She did not run. She walked. Fast, deliberate, straight toward Court Dunbar, through the gap in the fence rail, into the working area where civilians were absolutely not supposed to be standing. Several people saw her and said nothing. One man started to raise a hand and then dropped it. She stopped 3 feet from Court Dunbar's elbow. "Stop," she said. Just the one word. Flat and certain, the way you speak when you are not asking. Dunbar turned. His eyes found her and did the thing men's eyes do when they locate a woman in a context where they feel they have authority: a rapid appraisal, a dismissal, a slight reconfiguration of the face that was supposed to communicate amusement. "Excuse me," he said. "I said stop." Nora looked at the mare. The horse had raised her head slightly and was watching Nora with those dark, alert eyes. "That animal cannot pull this load. She's late-term pregnant, and she's in distress. Anyone with eyes can see it. Anyone with eyes," Dunbar repeated slowly, "can also see that this is my horse on my property, and you are somewhere you've got no business being, Mrs. Caswell." He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. "She needs water, and she needs to be unhitched," Nora said. "Right now." Dunbar looked at the crowd that had gathered. Maybe 30 people, fence rail to fence rail, nobody moving. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who was deciding something. "Go back to your little herb stand," he said, and raised the board again. Nora stepped between him and the horse. The crowd went completely silent. Dunbar stared at her. She stared back. She could feel her own heartbeat in her hands, in her teeth, in the backs of her knees. She was 58 years old, and she had not been this frightened since the morning she identified her mother's body in the county hospital, and she did not move. "You touch this horse again," she said quietly, "and everyone here will have seen it." Something moved through Dunbar's face, not shame, not conscience, something colder, a calculation. He lowered the board. "You have no idea," he said, low enough that only she heard it, "what you just stepped into." He walked away. The crowd began to murmur. Someone began unhitching the mare from the cart. Nora turned back to the horse and put her hand on the animal's neck, just below the jaw, where the pulse runs close to the surface. She could feel it, fast and scared and very much alive. "I've got you," she said. She didn't know why. She had said it before, to hurt animals, to frighten things, to Randall in the last weeks of his life. It was the truest thing she knew how to say. The mare leaned slightly into her hand. That was all. Just that. But something had shifted in the air of the Crestfall Fairgrounds, something that would not shift back, and Nora Caswell, who had kept her head down for 23 years, had just made herself visible to every person who mattered in this town. The week after the vaquejada was very quiet. Too quiet, Nora thought. Crestfall had a specific kind of quiet that was different from the ordinary absence of noise. A muffled quality, the sound of a town chewing something over, passing it around, deciding what to do with it. 3 days after the fairgrounds, she found one of her chickens dead on the wrong side of the fence. Not killed by a predator. No marks, no feathers, no sign of struggle. Just dead, placed carefully, folded. A message, then. She buried the chicken, reinforced the fence line, and said nothing. 5 days after, the dead cat. Not hers. A gray barn cat she'd never seen before, left at the foot of her drive with its neck broken. Clean. Professional, in the terrible way that word can be applied to cruelty. She called the county animal control. The woman on the phone was apologetic and distant and very clearly had been told something about this call before it came. "Nothing we can do, ma'am, if it's not your animal." "Someone is leaving dead animals on my property," Nora said. "You'll want to file a report with the sheriff's office." She did not call the sheriff's office. What she did instead, she loaded the white mare's paperwork into her truck and drove to the county records office and spent 3 hours going through transfer documents, trying to understand how an animal in that condition had come to be entered in a public event where she was expected to work. What she found stopped her cold. The mare's registration papers listed an owner named Court Dunbar, acquisition date 14 months prior. The animal was listed in the records as a draft cross, age unknown, purchased from a private seller in Behar County. There was a transfer certificate, the kind you fill out for ordinary livestock sales, not for registered animals. But the horse's Freeze brand, A small series of numbers on the inside of the left shoulder, partially obscured by the rope burn scar, did not match any animal registered to Court Dunbar. It matched nothing in the county database at all. Nora photographed it with her phone. She went home. That night, she sat on her porch in the dark and thought about the mare, who she had, after considerable argument with herself and very little sleep, brought to her property. The mare was in her barn now, in Theodore's stall, eating hay at the rate of someone making up for lost time. Theodore had been moved to a temporary pen with clearly expressed opinions about the arrangement. She had not planned to keep the horse. She had arranged for the county AG extension to come pick it up, and the extension officer had called back 2 hours later to say that the appointment would need to be rescheduled. No date available. Rescheduled to nothing, same as the animal control call. She was being managed, she understood, quietly, efficiently, from multiple directions at once. The way you manage someone you have decided is a problem, but not yet a big enough problem to handle directly. She was watering the mare. Grace, she had started calling her, because the animal had a quality of endurance that seemed to ask for a name with some weight in it. When she heard the truck pull up her drive, old truck, late model, driven carefully by a man who did not need to announce himself with speed. She recognized him before he climbed out. 60-something, thin in the shoulders, with a white mustache and the permanent squint of someone who has spent decades looking at things closely in bad light. His name was Albert Quist, and he was the veterinarian who served the eastern half of the county, and he had a reputation in Crestfall that was unusual. He had never, in 40 years of practice, told anyone what he knew about anyone else's animals. He came to the fence rail and looked at Grace for a long moment without speaking. Nora waited. "She's further along than she looks," he said finally. "Maybe 2 weeks. Maybe less. She's eating. Good." He was quiet. Then, that brand on her shoulder. "I photographed it." He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something. "Nora, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that once I tell you, there's no putting it back." She looked at him. He had known her since she was 30, had treated Randall's dogs, had signed the paperwork when Theodore came to her malnourished and half-blind. "Tell me," she said. "This horse was reported stolen 4 years ago," Albert said, "from a woman named Isa Vance. She ran a small breeding operation out of Zavala County. She disappeared 8 months after filing the theft report." He paused. "The case is still officially open." Nora was quiet for a long moment. The mare breathed beside her, slow and steady. "What kind of breeding operation?" she asked. Albert looked at her. "The kind," he said carefully, "that would make this foal worth a very great deal of money to the wrong people." What followed was not dramatic. That was the worst part. It was slow, methodical, the kind of pressure that doesn't announce itself as pressure. It just makes the air harder to breathe and the distances longer and every ordinary thing slightly more difficult than it was the week before. The first thing that happened, Nora's account at Crestfall First Federal was flagged for review. She received a letter explaining that due to regulatory compliance requirements, access to her line of credit had been temporarily suspended pending documentation review. She had never missed a payment in 11 years. The letter was signed by a loan officer named Gil Peckett, who had graduated high school with Court Dunbar's youngest son. She photocopied the letter and put it in a folder. The second thing, the Saturday Market Committee sent her a notice that her table permit for the following month had not been renewed due to updated vendor policies. She had held that permit for 7 years. No one on the committee would meet her eyes when she asked about it at the next town council meeting. She photocopied that letter too. The third thing was the men. Not one man. Men. Different trucks, different times, but always there. Parked on the county road that ran along her western fence line, just far enough back that she couldn't claim trespassing. They didn't do anything. They just watched. Sometimes one truck. Sometimes two. Always there when she came out in the morning. Sometimes there at midnight when she couldn't sleep and walked the porch. Nora began sleeping in 2-hour shifts. Theodore, who had been moved back to his stall after Grace proved entirely capable of defending her own space, grew agitated and would not eat properly. The dogs, a pair of hounds named nothing in particular because Nora had stopped naming dogs after Randall died, began patrolling the fence line at night with a purposefulness she had not seen in them before. She was not afraid. That surprised her. Or rather, she was afraid, constantly, but the fear had taken a form she recognized. It was the same fear she had carried for 23 years. Chronic, load-bearing, a structural element of the life she'd built. What was new was not the fear. What was new was the feeling, growing slowly in the center of her chest, that this time she was not going to let the fear win. Albert came back on the 8th day. He came after dark, no headlights in the last quarter mile of her drive. She saw him coming from the porch and did not call out, just waited. "I found something," he said, sitting at her kitchen table with his hat in his hands. "It took me a while because it was buried, deliberately buried, I think, in a lot of paperwork that was designed to be confusing." He laid a manila folder on the table. Inside, photocopies of veterinary registration records, bloodline documentation, breeding certificates, a chain of ownership that went back 14 years, through 3 different fictitious company names, to a breeding collective that operated, on paper, out of an address in Houston that turned out to be a UPS store. "The foal this mare is carrying," Albert said quietly, "is descended from a stallion named Fortuna's last son. He was never publicly registered, but among people in a certain world, he's known. His offspring have won private track races that have generated, conservative estimate, $30 million in side bets over the last decade." Nora looked at the papers. Illegal races. Very well organized. The people running them have considerable interest in controlling which horses reproduce and which don't. He paused, and in making sure that anyone who threatens that control doesn't get the chance to do it twice. Like Isa Vance. He didn't answer that directly. He didn't need to. "Nora, these men, the ones behind this, not Dunbar, he's just a hand in it. They have money and they have history in this county. And they are not going to let you sit on that mare until she drops a foal that can be traced back through 14 years of records they thought were hidden." She was quiet for a moment. "What happened to Isa Vance?" "No one knows. Officially." He looked at his hat. "Unofficially, there are people who think she started asking the same kinds of questions you're starting to ask, and that someone made the decision that questions were more dangerous than solutions." "Like what happened to my mother," Nora said. The words came out calm. She hadn't planned them, but they were true, and she let them stay in the room. Albert looked up at her. He held her gaze for a long time, the way a man looks at someone when he has been carrying something that belongs to them and is finally figuring out how to hand it over. "I've been in this county 40 years, he said. "I have treated animals for people I knew were hurting other people. I have kept my mouth shut because I told myself it wasn't my fight and that getting involved would cost me more than I could afford." He pushed the folder another inch toward her. "I'm telling you this. I think your mother's accident was not an accident. I think the man who ordered it is connected to the same network that stole that horse and made Isa Vance disappear. And I think you are the only person in Crestfall right now who is in a position to prove it. Because I have the mare. Because you have the mare, the brand photographs, and now these records." He stood. "And because you are the only person in this county who has ever stood in front of Court Dunbar and not moved." He put on his hat. "I have a choice for you," he said. "And I won't dress it up, because you deserve not to have it dressed up." He looked at her steadily. "You can return Grace to Dunbar tomorrow morning. Tell him you reconsidered. He'll accept it. They just want the foal back in their hands before it's born. Your land stays. Your credit line reopens. The trucks stop coming." She waited. "Or you hold on. Wait for the foal. Let me go find the rest of what I'm looking for. There are documents I haven't gotten to yet, records from the period when your mother died. But if you hold on, Nora, these men will not wait politely. And I cannot promise you I'll be fast enough." The kitchen was very quiet. Through the window, she could see the barn, the faint light she left on inside it for Grace. "Go find your documents," she said. Albert nodded once. He went out the door. She listened to his truck go slowly down the drive, lights off until he reached the county road. Then she went to the barn and sat with Grace in the straw and listened to the mare breathe and didn't sleep at all. 3 days later, Albert did not come. Nora called his clinic. The woman who answered, young, efficient, a little too carefully neutral, said that Dr. Quist had taken a personal leave of absence. No, she didn't know when he would return. No, she couldn't provide a contact number. His truck was gone from his property. His clinic had been locked with a padlock she didn't recognize. Nora stood in front of that padlock for a full minute in the morning heat, and then she drove back to her farm and fed the animals and thought. He had warned her he might not be fast enough. But she hadn't thought he meant like this, just gone, as though he'd been erased. She went back through what she knew. The mare's brand matched no registered animal in the county system. But the folder Alburn had left, which she had read 4 times now and memorized, referenced a registration system used by a private organization called the Meridian Breeders Collective, which was not affiliated with any public registry and appeared, from the fragments of documentation, to have been established deliberately outside regulatory oversight. The Meridian Collective's paperwork included, on one half-page of what appeared to be a membership directory, a list of regional representatives. Texas was listed with 3 names. The first 2 meant nothing to her. The third, a man named Stuart Holt, current county commissioner, longtime ally of the Dunbar and Howell families. And she went still when she found the connection, absolutely still. The man who had been business partners with the owner of the livestock truck that had run Della Caswell off Farm Road 1223 years ago. Not Dunbar, not anyone she'd been looking at. A quieter man, a man in a suit, a man who went to church and coached youth baseball and had never once, in the decades she'd known his face from a distance, looked at her with anything other than polite indifference. A man who had been at the Crestfall Vaquejada, standing near the fence rail, when she stepped between Court Dunbar and the mare. She understood something then, a cold, clarifying understanding, the kind that doesn't frighten so much as organize. He had been watching her since that morning. Not Dunbar. Dunbar was the hand. Holt was the eye, and the memory, and the decision-making. And she had shown him, in front of 30 witnesses, that she was not someone who stayed quiet. She went to the barn. Grace was lying down, which the mare had started doing more frequently, a sign, Nora knew, that the end of the pregnancy was close. She lay on her side in the deep straw, and her belly rose and fell with the movement inside it, the full turning, settling, preparing for a world it didn't know about yet. Nora sat beside her for a long time. She was thinking about her mother, about the morning Della Caswell had gone out early to drive to the county seat, because she had a 9 o'clock appointment with a records clerk who had agreed to look at the water diversion complaint. She had been cheerful that morning. Nora remembered this specifically, the particular cheerfulness of someone who has been angry for a long time and has finally decided to do something about it. She had kissed Nora on the cheek before she left. She had said, "Back by noon." She had not been back by noon. Nora pressed her forehead against Grace's neck and breathed. She had waited 23 years because she told herself it was too late. The damage was done. The men who had done it were too powerful, and she had too much to lose. But here was the thing about waiting 23 years. The evidence doesn't disappear, necessarily. Sometimes it just sits there, in half-filed folders and locked clinic offices and old registration systems that someone forgot to fully erase, waiting for the one person stubborn enough to dig. She was that person. She had always been that person. She just hadn't known it yet. They came on a Tuesday morning. Not Dunbar's men this time. Not the battered pickups that had been sitting on her road. These were different vehicles, 2 black SUVs with Houston plates, driving slowly up her gravel drive at 7 in the morning like they had every right to be there. 3 men got out. Expensive boots. Conference room posture. One of them carried a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Nora's truck. The man in front was around 40. Good-looking in the way that money makes things good-looking. The teeth, the skin, the absence of anything worn or worried in the face. He extended a hand as he walked toward her porch. "Mrs. Caswell, my name is Derland. I represent several clients with an interest in the horse you've been caring for on this property." She did not take his hand. She stood on the porch with her coffee cup and looked at him. "The horse's name is Grace," she said. "What do you want?" Derland lowered his hand smoothly, as if this were something he had planned for. He smiled. "We want to help you," he said. "We understand you've taken on some financial difficulty recently. A credit situation, some permit issues. My clients are prepared to resolve all of that, completely, in exchange for a voluntary transfer of the mare and her foal, once delivered." "To who?" "To appropriate custodial care. Meaning your clients. Meaning facilities better equipped to manage a high-value animal." He opened the portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper, the top third covered in dense legalese, the bottom third blank. "We've prepared a transfer agreement. It's straightforward. It resolves your debt situation, reinstates your market permits, and includes a cash settlement for your trouble. All you need to do is sign." Nora looked at the paper. She did not reach for it. "And if I don't sign?" The man's smile didn't change. That was the most frightening thing about him, the complete stability of the expression. Then I'm afraid the resolution of your financial difficulties will depend on processes outside our control. And those processes can be quite slow. He paused. Your property assessment comes up for county review next month, I believe. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked past him at the two men behind him, who were looking at the barn with a specific kind of focused attention that made her want to step off the porch and put herself between them and the barn door. You should know, she said, that I have photographed the Mare's Freeze brand. I have documents linking the horse's bloodline to a registry that your clients are connected to. And I have the name of a woman named Isa Vance, whose disappearance is connected to the same network. Something moved through Derlin's face. Just briefly, a flicker beneath the composure, quick as a fish moving underwater. I'd encourage you to be careful about claims like that, he said. Accusations against private individuals without legal standing. I'm not making an accusation, Nora said. I'm telling you what I know, so you can tell your clients. And they can decide whether they want to continue this conversation or whether they want to wait and see what I do with what I have. Silence. The morning was very bright and very still. Somewhere behind the barn, Theodore made his opinion of strangers known. 24 hours, Derlin said finally. He picked up the transfer agreement and put it back in the portfolio. We'll leave the offer open. I strongly recommend you think carefully before you walk away from it. He got back in the SUV. The other two men followed, still looking at the barn. She watched them go. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly. She set down the coffee cup and stood there until the sound of the engines faded completely. Then she went inside and called the three people in the world she thought she could still trust. The first, Mott Beecham, a retired journalist from Laredo who had written, 8 years ago, a series of articles about illegal horse racing networks in South Texas that had won him a prize and earned him several threatening phone calls. She had kept his number for reasons she hadn't entirely been able to articulate to herself. The second, a woman named Dara Lentz, who ran a livestock advocacy organization out of San Antonio and who had once, at the Saturday market, quietly bought 6 of Nora's tinctures and left her business card beside the money. If you ever need someone who knows how to make noise, Dara had said, you call. The third person she called was not a person she knew. It was the tip line for the investigative unit of a regional newspaper, and she left a message with her name and number and the words, I have documentation of a criminal network operating in Crestfall County that may be connected to the disappearance of a woman named Isa Vance. I am willing to talk. She hung up. She went to the barn. Grace was awake and standing, eating with the slow, concentrated dedication of an animal building reserves for something. 2 weeks, Nora said quietly. Maybe less. The mare looked at her. Those dark eyes, still alert, still watching, still carrying something that looked, if you wanted to see it, like trust. Nora did want to see it. Mott Beecham called back within the hour. He listened to everything she said without interrupting, which was unusual in her experience of people. When she finished, there was a pause long enough that she checked to make sure the call was still connected. Meridian Collective, he said finally. I came across that name once, 6 years ago. A source mentioned it, and then went quiet immediately, the way people go quiet when they've said something they wish they could take back. Another pause. Mrs. Caswell. The people connected to that organization are not small players. The racing operations alone, we're talking about sums that attract the kind of protection money can't buy at the state level, not just the county level. I know, she said. Do you understand what I'm saying when I say state level? I'm not a child, Mr. Beecham. A sound on the line that might have been a brief, appreciative exhale. No, you're not. He was quiet again. What do you need from me? I need someone to know what I know, in case something happens to me. She said it plainly because it was true, and because she was 58 years old and had buried her husband and her mother, and she was not interested in pretending. He said, I can do that. I can do more than that, if you'll let me. For now, she said, just no. Dara Lentz called that afternoon. She was practical in the way of women who have fought long enough to have stopped being surprised by anything. The foal can be certified independently, Dara said. If you can document the birth, photographs, witnesses, a veterinary examination from someone outside the county, that creates a record that's very difficult to erase. It takes the asset out of the shadowy paperwork world and puts it into something provable. My veterinarian has disappeared, Nora said. I know a vet in Uvalde who owes me a favor, Doris said. She can be there. You don't know when the birth will be. Then I'll tell her to stay loose. A pause. Nora, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've seen cases where the animal was just an animal, and cases where the animal was connected to something much larger. When it's the second kind, when people start showing up at your door with transfer agreements, that means the thing you're sitting on is big enough to matter. You understand? Yes. Good. Keep the horse. Keep your doors locked. Keep records of every vehicle, every visitor, every threat. And call me the moment labor starts. She kept records. She kept records the way her mother had kept records, carefully, in a notebook, with dates and times, because Della Caswell had always said that the powerful relied on the powerless not writing things down, and that the one thing you could do for free, every time, was remember and record. But it was the nights that were hardest. Not because of the trucks on the road. She had grown almost accustomed to those. But because of the silence inside the house, and the weight of what she was carrying, and the way she would catch herself standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning with no memory of having gotten up, staring at the window above the sink. She thought about Randall, about the particular stubbornness he had loved and hated in equal measure, the way she would dig her heels in on something and not move even when moving would have been smarter. You were built facing into the wind, he had told her once, not as a complaint, just as an observation. That's just how you came out. She thought about Della, about her mother's anger, which had been precise and purposeful and had never, in Nora's memory, been turned on the wrong target. About how she had spent her last morning cheerful, because she was finally doing something. She thought about the 14 acres around her, the vegetable garden, Theodore's perpetual sourness, the hounds patrolling the fence. She thought about the offer in that leather portfolio and how simple it would be to sign it. She would not starve. She would not lose the land. She would wake up tomorrow and the trucks would be gone from the road, and the permit would be reinstated, and the credit line would reopen, and everything would go back to the shape of the life she had built out of what was left after the losses. And nobody would ever know about Isa Vance. And nobody would ever know about Della Caswell. And Grace's foal would be born into hands that valued it only as a financial instrument. Its mother returned to a life of freight pulling until she couldn't anymore, and that would be the end of it. She stood at the window for a long time. She thought about the vaquejada, about stepping through the fence rail, about the moment when her feet had been moving before her mind had fully formed a plan, pulled by something older and simpler than strategy. She thought about what it had felt like to stand between a frightened animal and the thing trying to hurt it. She had not felt fear in that moment. Not exactly. She had felt, and she groped for the word, turning it over, clarity, like stepping out of a long sleep. She was still standing at the window when the first pale light came through the eastern hills. She had made her decision 3 weeks ago, she understood. She had made it the moment she stepped through that fence rail. Everything since then had been a test of whether she could hold on to it when the price became real. The price was real now. She was holding on. She went to the barn. Grace was lying on her side again, breathing in long, slow waves. The foal's movement was visible beneath the skin, a shifting, insistent presence, working toward arrival on its own schedule. Not yet, Nora said softly. A little longer. She sat in the straw beside the mare and watched the light come up and made her peace with what was coming. The call came on a Friday, exactly 21 days after the vaquejada. Not from Derland. From Stuart Holt. She had never spoken to Stuart Holt directly in her life. He had always existed at a remove, a name on a ballot, a face at a distance, a signature on documents that shaped things without being visible in the shaping. He called her cell phone at 6 in the evening, and he did not bother with pleasantries. I think we've been patient enough, he said. The offer expires tonight. I need an answer. My answer hasn't changed, Nora said. A pause. Nora, the use of her first name, as a form of pressure. I've known about your situation for a long time. I know what this land means to you. I know what you've been carrying since your mother died. Something cold moved through her. I want you to understand something, he said. This does not have to be a confrontation. You're a reasonable woman. You know how this county works. You know that some things are larger than any one person's feelings about them. Like what happened to my mother. Silence. Or what happened to Isa Vance, she said. The silence stretched. Be very careful, he said, and the politeness was gone from his voice. Entirely gone. Come and get the horse, she said. Come yourself. Come tomorrow morning and come to my property. I'll be here." She hung up. Then she called Mott Beecham and told him to be there by 8. She called Dara Lintz and said, "Now?" She called Dara's veterinarian contact in Uvalde and gave her the address. She went to the barn. Grace was in labor. Not fully, not in the final, urgent stage. But the early contractions had started, the mare moving restlessly, her tail lifted, her breath coming in shorter intervals. It had begun. Nora called the 3 families she trusted most in Crestfall. Families who had sold her eggs when she started the farm, who had bought her remedies, whose children she had babysat in a different time. She told them what was happening. She told them to come if they were willing and to tell their neighbors. Then she unlocked the barn door and left it open, and she waited. They came at 9 in the morning, 7 vehicles, all at once. Dunbar's truck in front and Holt's car behind it, and men she half recognized filling the rest. They came onto her property without hesitation, without announcement, without knocking, the way men come onto property they have already decided belongs to them. Nora walked out of the barn to meet them. She was not alone. Mott Beecham stood beside her with a recorder and a camera. Dara Lintz stood on her other side. Dara's veterinarian was inside the barn with Grace. And behind Nora, in the yard, in numbers she had not anticipated, people, field workers, and their families. A woman from the market committee who had been afraid for years and apparently decided, sometime in the last 12 hours, that she was done being afraid. 2 men who had worked Dunbar cattle for a decade and had driven through the night to be here. People she had never expected, standing quietly in the morning light. 40 maybe. 50. Holt stopped when he saw them. His face did something complicated. "This is private property," Nora said, into the silence. "You are trespassing. Every person here has seen you arrive. Mr. Beecham is recording." Dunbar started to speak. Holt raised a hand to stop him. "Mrs. Caswell," Holt said. His voice was very controlled. "This is not a situation you can manage." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not managing it alone." From the barn came a sound. A single, startled cry, high and new and unmistakably alive. The foal had arrived. Nora held Holt's gaze and did not look away. For a moment, nothing moved. The sound from the barn faded into the morning air. The newborn cry dissipated into the heat, and the silence settled around all of them. 50 people in a farmyard, 2 sides of something, the balance point still unresolved. Holt's jaw worked. He looked from Nora to the camera to the people standing behind her and back to Nora. "You don't know what you've done," he said. "I think I do," she said. He took a step toward her. One of the men behind Nora, a field worker she had seen at the Saturday market, thick-armed and sun-dark and absolutely still, moved forward 1 step without speaking. Then another man. Then a third. Holt stopped. Dunbar, behind him, said something in a low voice. Holt shook his head once, sharply. "This isn't over," he said to Nora. "It's starting to be," she said. Beauchamp's recorder ran the whole time. Dara had her phone out. The woman from the market committee had been quietly speaking into her own phone since Nora stepped out of the barn, talking, Nora would learn later, to a contact at a regional television station who had been waiting for confirmation before driving out from San Antonio. Holt got back in his car. It took him a long time. He stood outside the driver's door for almost a minute, and she understood he was calculating, counting the witnesses, assessing the camera, measuring the distance between what he had planned and what was now documented in multiple recordings. She watched him do it. She did not help him. He drove away. Dunbar's truck stayed longer. The men around it shuffled. One of them looked directly at Nora, and she looked back at him without blinking. And after a moment, he looked away and got in the truck, and Dunbar followed. It was not over. She knew that. But something had cracked open in it that could not be sealed back up. She went into the barn. The foal was there, pale gray, unsteady, impossibly new, lying in the straw with its legs arranged in the uncertain angles of a creature that hasn't yet worked out what legs are for. Grace had turned to clean it. Her exhaustion transformed for the moment into a fierce, focused tenderness that was painful to witness in its completeness. The vet from Uvalde was crouching nearby, already making notes. "Mare's okay," she said without looking up. "Foal's okay. Small but strong." Nora crouched in the straw. She looked at the foal. She looked at Grace, who had turned to look at her. Those dark eyes, still alert, still carrying that quality she had first noticed across a fairgrounds pen 3 weeks ago. She had called it trust. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was simply recognition. One creature that had been surviving something, seeing another, and taking note. Nora put her hand on the foal's side. It was warm and damp and trembling with the effort of being newly alive. Something broke open in her chest that had been sealed for 23 years. Not dramatically, not the way the movies do it, with a gasp and a wail. Quietly, a door she hadn't even known was still closed, opening. She let it. She sat in the straw in the August heat and she cried, without noise, without performance, for a long time. Albornquist came back on a Tuesday, 11 days after the morning in the yard, 3 days after the first television report ran, and 2 days after the Texas Rangers opened a formal inquiry into the Meridian Breeders Collective and its connections to county officials in 3 southern Texas counties. The old veterinarian's truck came slowly up Nora's drive, with its lights on this time. He looked worse for the 11 days. Thinner. The mustache needed attention, but his eyes were clear, and he was carrying a box. "I had to go get these," he said, setting the box on her kitchen table. "I'm sorry it took longer than I said." She didn't answer. She just opened the box. Documents. A great many of them. Some originals, some copies of originals that had been filed in a private storage facility outside Kerrville. Veterinary records going back 16 years, tracking the movement of animals through the Meridian network. Financial transfer records. Minutes of meetings, handwritten, from what appeared to be the collective's internal governance structure. And in a separate envelope, sealed, with her name on it in Alborn's handwriting, photographs. Photographs from 23 years ago. The livestock truck that had run her mother off Farm Road 12. No company markings in some images, but earlier photographs from the same week showing the markings, the route numbers, the Howell operations identification clearly visible. A receipt for the truck's rental to a shell company registered to Stuart Holt's business address. A medical report from the driver, filed internally, describing the accident, not as an accident, but as a traffic event resulting in successful property dissuasion. Property dissuasion, the bureaucratic language for killing her mother. She sat with the photographs for a long time. Alborn sat across from her and said nothing. He understood, she thought, that there was nothing to say, that this was a moment that didn't need company, only witness. "Where did you get these?" she finally asked. "From the same place ISA Vance found them," he said. "She gave them to me, to hold, in case something happened." He looked at his hands. "I should have given them to you sooner. I should have done a lot of things sooner." She looked at him. He was an old man who had kept quiet for too long and knew it, and was going to live with that knowledge and couldn't undo it. She understood that entirely. "You're here now," she said. She handed the envelope to Mott Beecham when he arrived that afternoon. He looked through the photographs without speaking, and when he finished, he set them down and rubbed his face with both hands. "This is enough," he said. "This is more than enough." She nodded. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked. "It's going to be loud." She thought about Grace and the foal, running now in the south field. Wobbly still, but running. The mare keeping close with the patient attention of a mother who has waited a long time for this. She thought about Della Caswell's last morning, about cheerfulness as an act of courage. "I've been ready," Nora said. "I just didn't know it yet." 3 weeks after the Rangers opened their inquiry, Stuart Holt's lawyers filed a civil defamation suit against Nora Caswell, Mott Beecham, and the regional newspaper that had run the investigation. The suit was 400 pages. The filing fee alone was designed to be a message. Nora read the filing once, from front to back, sitting at her kitchen table with coffee that went cold. Then she set it down and called Dara Lentz. "They're suing me," she said. "Yes," Dara said. "I expected they would. Can I fight it?" "You can't fight it alone. But there are organizations that have been watching the Meridian story develop, and there are lawyers who will take this case for reasons that have nothing to do with money." A pause. "Nora, this is what they do. This is the last tool they have. They tried to buy you. They tried to scare you. They tried to erase the evidence. This is the bottom of the bag, the lawsuit. It's expensive and it's meant to exhaust you." "I'm tired," Nora said honestly. "I know, but I'm not done. I know that too." What Holt had not counted on, what none of them had counted on, Nora thought later, was the response to the television coverage. Letters arrived. Donations, small ones, from people she had never met in places she'd never been. Beaumont, Lubbock, El Paso, Corpus. People who had grown up in towns like Crest Fall, who recognized the machinery of it, who had their own versions of the story. The lawsuit became its own story. The defamation filing ran in newspapers that the original piece hadn't reached. Legal clinics called Mott Beecham. 2 law school clinics in Texas contacted Nora directly about pro bono representation. Holt had intended the lawsuit to silence her. Instead, it turned a regional story into a state story, and then, slowly, into something larger. He resigned from the county commission on a Thursday, quietly, through a statement released by his attorney that cited personal health reasons. 3 days later, 2 other commissioners whose names had appeared in Alburn's documents announced they would not seek re-election. Dunbar's operation was placed under a state agriculture investigation. The Meridian Collective's Houston address was raided. A woman who had been a bookkeeper for the collective for 9 years agreed to cooperate. ISA Vance had not been found. That wound stayed open. But the investigation was real now, funded and formal, and the names in it were no longer protected. Nora read the news in the morning on her porch, Theodore leaning against the rail beside her in companionable disapproval of the morning. The dogs sprawled on the steps, the south field bright in the early light. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired and clean and very much present, awake in the world in a way she had not been for a long time. By the following spring, the south field had a new fence. Nora had not put it there herself. 4 of the field workers who had stood in her yard that August morning had come back, uninvited and with their own materials, and built it on a Saturday in March while she stood on the porch and watched and tried to find the words for what she was feeling and found none sufficient. She fed them lunch. It was the only thing she could offer, and they accepted it without ceremony, which was the right way to accept things you can't be repaid for. Grace and the foal, a colt, pale gray and growing into his legs with the particular confidence of a creature that had been loved from the start, ran the south field every morning. The colt had been named not by Nora but by the 13-year-old boy with the gap-toothed grin who had shown up one Saturday, claiming to have been the one who'd brought her to the fairgrounds and therefore had some say in the matter. She had agreed, because he was right. He named the colt Second Chance. She let it stand. Alburn Quist had returned to his practice. He was quieter now, or perhaps she was simply more attuned to the frequency of quiet. He came to check on Grace once a month, and they drank coffee on the porch and sometimes talked and sometimes didn't. He never asked for her forgiveness. She never offered it explicitly, but he came back every month, which was its own kind of language. Mott Beauchamp's series on the Meridian Collective ran in 5 parts and won a press award, and, more importantly, fed material to federal investigators who had been watching the illegal racing network for 3 years without enough to move on. It was enough now. Dara Lintz's organization established a livestock welfare monitoring program for the county, staffed partly by field workers who had found they had things to say once they believed someone would listen. The defamation suit was dismissed in November. The judge's ruling was 12 pages, and the relevant portion was, in Nora's reading, essentially 4 words. Not even close, counselor. She kept a copy of it pinned to the wall above her kitchen table. The Howell and Dunbar operations still existed. The land didn't change hands overnight. Power moved slowly when it moved at all, and she was under no illusion that what had cracked was the same as what was broken. But something had cracked. She could feel it in the way people looked at her in Crestfall. Not all people, not every encounter, but enough. The specific quality of a town beginning, slowly, to remember how to speak. She was 59 years old. She had 14 acres and 4 goats and 11 chickens, and a mule who disapproved of everything, and 2 hounds who had earned their own fence patrol, and a mare who trusted her, and a foal learning what trust was. She had her mother's grave in the county cemetery, and she went every Sunday now and stood for a few minutes and talked, told Della what was happening, what had come loose, what was still stuck, what she was working on. She didn't know if that meant anything. She had stopped needing to know. On a morning in April, she walked the south fence at dawn with the dogs running ahead, the lights still flat and silver, the grass wet with dew. Second Chance came cantering to the fence rail when he saw her, still a little wobbly in the turns, but better every week. And she put her hand on his neck and felt the heat of him, the aliveness of him, the uncomplicated fact of a creature that had been born under the worst circumstances and was nonetheless here, and moving, and unbroken. "Good morning," she said. She meant it more than she had meant almost anything. She started walking back to the house. There was work to do. There was always work to do. She did not mind. Nora Caswell wasn't looking for a fight. She was just a woman who couldn't keep walking past something she knew was wrong. And that one moment, that one small step through a fence rail, unraveled 23 years of buried truth and changed not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Sometimes that's all it takes. Not heroism, not a plan, just the refusal to look away when you could. If this story hit something in you, if you've ever stood at a moment like that and wondered whether to step through, hit like, leave a comment, tell me what city you're watching from. Subscribe if you haven't, because the next story is already coming and it's going to ask you a different kind of question. Until then, remember that silence has a cost, and so does courage. The difference is what you're left with afterward.